Okay, good afternoon once again. This is the exciting part of our seminar. You have gone through the presentation with the Q&A. Then we have a short networking break that allows the people here in the seminar to socialize with each other, exchange business cards, and talk shop for a little while. And while our group is small today, largely because of vacations and travel schedules, but they are the diehard fans. And so the quality of conversations that they had reached totally new levels that larger groups may not enjoy. The panel discussion, the purpose of the panel discussion is to have a more informal exchange with subject matter experts on the subject, as well as encourage you to ask more probing questions. A lot of times with the presentation, because of expediency, you limit your questions or you ask a portion of a question. Well, in the panel discussion, the idea is to be unstructured and give you an opportunity to ask those more profound questions, and also for the speakers to make comments that are not captured in PowerPoint presentations. And I had a very interesting exchange with an old-timer in this business who has been advising the industry for over 35 years. And he said, "Erfan, do you know when the smart grid stops working?" And I said, "No." He says, "When the PowerPoint is turned off." And he was referring to this flurry of presentations on this magical grid that is going to show up. And all it was describing was the imagination of Imagineers. That's the new term I learned today from Bob. And PowerPoint does an amazing job of concealing complexity. And so the panel discussion gives you an opportunity to see if the smart grid can stay on after the PowerPoint is turned off. Couple of questions. We have about 30 minutes. And during this time, I'm going to ask the panelists to be near me so that when they want to say something, then they'll be close to the microphone. I want to make sure that the folks in the webinar are able to hear. So when I ask you the question, you have to kind of physically come here and deal with it. So the first question that I want to ask both of you is, how old were you when you realized that asset management was going to be a serious part of your career? I'm doing this just to break the ice first, and then I'll ask the more difficult questions. So we'll start with Chris.
I'm going to reply to that with the same response that I get from ladies when someone asks their age. I was 29.
20 more years in experience.
And I will answer the question and just say it was 12 years ago.
Okay.
So it was 12 years ago that I got involved in asset management, and it didn't have anything to do with anything other than an organization that needed to know what they had for national security purposes, and they needed to be able to have instant visibility. And it completely was a new paradigm. Before that, people had just lists, you know, Excel spreadsheets all over the place. And this was an organization, it was a federal organization that said, I need to be able to look out over my 500,000 things and be able to see it, and I got to have a complete list of everything that I want to look for within 2 minutes of anything across my entire organization. And I thought, this is a place to be, because that means that's a big problem, and big problems are always the fun ones to go after and solve.
So for the folks on the webinar who must be wondering, why is he asking this strange question? sense of humor is a critical prerequisite for all panelists of Smart Grid Educational Series, and I must say that both of them have passed with flying colors. So a round of applause to our panelists for having a sense of humor.
Are we done?
Now,
Works for me.
now for the more serious questions. So Chris, tell us, when it comes to asset management and incorporating best practices for asset management in an enterprise. Now, we could be talking about electric sector, but we could also be talking across the board. For especially this mid-sized companies, you know, the 500 million to a billion, and then the large-sized billion-plus companies, identify 3 critical challenges to incorporating a good asset management tool in enterprises of this magnitude.
Okay, let's start with something that Bob mentioned during his presentation, because I think it is out and away the most significant challenge, and that is human inertia. Just getting the people involved in the organization, regardless of size, but it's easier in a small organization than in a really large one, to just step up and say, this is goodness, we're going to do it, and then focus on what it takes to actually accomplish the work. The second one, in my mind, is just physically generating an inventory of what they already have on site that's there to be loaded into the tool. And I don't care whose tool it is. We're not talking brand names or anything else, but it has to be an automated, and as Bob said again, multi-dimensional tool, because you're not looking at just a 2-dimensional spreadsheet kind of a situation. And the third thing is really kind of another aspect to the first one. Make sure you maintain it consistently through time. If you just do it once and stop, all you've done is wasted a bunch of money and accomplished no good or no benefit whatsoever to either yourself or the organization. Yes?
When you talk about inertia, your first point, is it inertia in the person you're trying to get by off at a high level, or is inertia in rolling it out? Because I can see there's a lot of data that has to be.
The answer to that is yes.
Yeah, repeat the question
Yes.
for the webinar.
Oh, pardon me. Repeat the question. The question is, in terms of mental inertia to get this thing started and moving, is it much more the senior management people who have to buy in and agree to spend the money, or is it the lower down large number of people who actually do the work? My response was yes. Okay? You first have to convince them, in the face of opposition from the lower people, the senior management people, that it is a good idea to spend the money and to do this and continue through time and actually use it the way that it should be used. Then you have to actually get the guy who's been there 40 years and whose inventory is something that he keeps in a drawer on 12 sheets of paper. And to his mind, that's perfect, because he only sees one small facility that he manages. He's not looking at the entire scope of the corporation, which is where this has to be focused. All he's concerned about is the alligators in his swamp that are very close to certain tender portions of his anatomy.
So what do you find is most successful, to handhold that person to get their data up to speed? But also I'm curious, there must be some ongoing effort, and is there something that you can say, it's only going to take you 10 minutes a year, or is, you know, on average we find that once a person learns the system, it only takes them X per week?
The question was, what does it take to actually overcome the inertia of the people in that broadband lower echelon where you're dealing with the hundreds or thousands or whatever, who actually are going to have to go through the physical labor of implementing this thing? Is there something you can say or do that will, along the lines of, oh, this will only take you 10 minutes a month or 2 minutes a day or something like this, that will help motivate them? In my experience, it has always been get good, knowledgeable people in there to do it for them, and kind of drag them along. And that's the services aspect that Bob was referring to earlier as well.
And so when you say knowledgeable people, it tends to be your people first.
Pardon me?
When you say knowledgeable people, it tends to be your people.
Yes.
Who are helping them.
Right.
And then ultimately they become independent.
Right. The comment was that the knowledgeable people are coming from outside the organization and are going to come in and both transfer knowledge to the people in the organization and then help them accomplish the work and then stay there for a longer period to make sure that they understand what they're doing and why in the context, and that is absolutely correct.
The next question I have for Bob, walk us through a typical business cycle from the time you go in for that initial handshake till you've got the tool up and running and you're getting kudos from different levels of management. Just give us an idea of the process and maybe some highlights of milestones.
This is like a for-real movie, I think. It's so the handshake is they've done the deal. Is that what you're saying? They've issued the order on the handshake, or we're just starting the handshake saying, hey, we want to do something?
Hello, I'm Bob.
Well, it's hello, I'm Bob. It's like, my kid needs a new bike. Would you buy something from me today? You know, that's a really difficult one. But a typical implementation and setup is that we look for the business problem. You've got to go solve the business problem. And I don't try to solve everything all at once. I want to pick off the biggest pain point or a single pain point and win. And so when we pick off the pain point, we will talk about going in and doing a program that's going to be very focused with a small team of people. And so it's multi-pronged. There's several elements. There is, obviously you have the software aspect to it. You've got the functional requirements and the functional business processes that you need to be put into place. You've got the technical processes that you need to put into place, and that usually requires the implementation, the integration, setting up the software, integration with the existing systems and bringing it up. And then there is the training side, which I believe is different than the functional. And when I say training, and that is really moving people to want to do it. My experience has been is we have the most success when we pick somebody that is well respected by their peers and they are on the team from the word go. And they're coming in and they're the ones that go back after every meeting, go back, hey guys, this is going to be really cool. This is going to be really great. Wait till you see what we get to do. Because most of them back there are saying, oh man, another system, great. You know, if we all don't do it, it'll go away. Don't worry about it. So let's all agree that we're not going to do it. You know, that's that human inertia. So it's really important for us to get somebody on the team that's a cheerleader, somebody that's actually going to use it, that's respected by their peers, because they also give us the feedback that we don't see. An important part of it is that people need to integrate this into their everyday routine. It just becomes part of their job. And they're changing something that they're doing and swapping something else out. So you need someone that's going to tell them that this is going to make their job easier. In order to deliver on that promise that you're making then, it's really important that that person that you bring in gives you the right feedback. I can't tell you how many times somebody tries to put out a system and you get all of the business analysts out there and the IT people are there, and then it gets delivered out and people say, this is unusable. This doesn't work in the way it needs to work for me. So we want to get that person on board that's going to use it day in, day out, and they're going to be delivering feedback to us as we're bringing up that system as to how it's going to work with them. And then you deliver them a program in a way that it actually they embrace it because it's saving them time, it's saving them money, and they're getting something new out of it. At the end of the day, people like doing something new usually. because it's exciting. It breaks the routine, but it has to, they've got to see some value to it. The only way you're going to do that is if you bring it back.
So during the presentation from Bob, I'm sure most of you must have gone through a shift of the mind, or as the Greeks call it, metanoia, about what asset management is. We take a lot of things for granted without thinking that they are part of the assets of an organization. So when we think about asset management, we don't think in those very granular terms. But one thing that we learned from our discussion today is that the concept of asset is a sophisticated one. And like he started with the computer, and the computer is really made up of a combination of components. And those components could have firmware on them. Those firmwares could have versions. And so you begin to see the multifacetedness of assets. When you do asset management, you got to keep a very tight control over those attributes. You got to know what those attributes are. And that requires some exchange with the subject matter experts that do business with that asset day in and day out. So tell us, Chris, if you could, from your professional services engagement, and you may be one degree of separation from this, but from speaking with the IBM professional services folks, what kind of interaction occurs within such organizations before an asset management tool is deployed? What kind of exchange occurs with these subject matter experts in order to glean the information from them and then customize your product to meet their need? What is that process like?
Well, it starts primarily with having a subject matter expert who has two sides to being a subject matter expert. They not only know, in my case, the asset management tool happens to be Maximo, but they also know the electrical utility business, they know the water utility business, they know power gen inside of they know the T&D parts of electrical or whatever, so that they come in there and they're able to sit down and talk with a wide group of people across the company, in essence doing interviews, wanting and able to talk to them in terms and language that that person is able to understand, and they can understand the reply that comes back. And establishing that mutual level of knowledge and trust is probably the single most important step in the process. Once you've got that, then you can begin working with each of them to identify the different classes of assets that you have. And an asset class might be vehicles, but within vehicles you have cars, trucks, golf carts, and so on. And then as you have identified the classes, then you begin to drive it down to a lower level, and then the characteristics of each lower level. And as you've gained an understanding of that, you can begin assessing your tool to say, can it do what they want to do in the way that they need to have it done? And yeah, it's going to know about vehicles and different kinds of vehicles, but does it present the information in the way, does it provide the encapsulated knowledge about any one subgroup of vehicles that company needs to deal with? For example, Maximo may understand pickup truck, but it may not understand service truck with a set of tools, a set of parts, a set of test equipment, all of which enables the service technician who goes into the field to do his job on a consistent basis without having to reload the truck every single time. And once you have that, then you can make the physical modifications in code that are the relatively easy part of that whole process.
Thanks, Chris. So we have a question from Dolly, who says, did you have the case where one client had one software tool and replaced by other software tool with similar functionalities? For example, they had SAP and then they switched to Maximo. So I guess since they referred to Maximo, I'll have Chris
Okay.
come back and deal with this scenario.
The answer to that question is sort of. And the reason for that is that typically when I've seen a company that's willing to go under a major technology shift, moving from SAP to Maximo, the decision was not made solely on asset management. It was made on, is SAP doing the work for us all the way across the business? If it is not, then we're going to bring in Maximo for asset management, and we're going to bring something else in for customer, and all of the other functions that SAP does, not because they don't like the SAP asset management tool necessarily, it's because they have a problem with SAP per se. Maybe it's too expensive, maybe it's too complex, maybe it doesn't do what they need to do, whatever the issue might be there. And that's the times that I've seen when they're willing to swap something out, assuming similar capabilities and functions there.
Thanks, Chris.
By the way, tell them I don't want to badmouth SAP. That was just the example.
Yes. Yeah, and we are giving a general disclaimer that these forums are not bake-offs. So they are not a place for vendor bashing or accolades for vendors. But general statements will be made about what are considered good practices, and then we leave it to the thoughtful reader or the listener to take that information and make the decisions appropriate for their organizations. So along those lines, I'm going to bring up the Q&A section here because there were some questions that were there previously. I'll X out of there. Okay, so I'm going to read some of the comments that we had in the Q&A before the break because I think they're worthy. Okay. All right, so the first few I think we'll pass. Okay. Robert Cormier asks, where do you see RFID and machine-to-machine helping out in asset management? I think it's kind of self-evident that you have RFID, so what that does is as assets are coming in or going out, you could have sensors that can receive the signal from the RFID tags, and from that have real-time modification of your asset management data. And this is especially important like in organizations like the military, where a lot of equipment goes in and out, or it could be in places that have large yards, where equipment is going in and out. That with tagging, what you could do is have a whole bunch of them on the back of a truck or something, and just by scanning, you can quickly pick up those RFID tag information. So this is just a means of, it's an interface, it's a data interface, so it's important to have. And machine-to-machine, well, again, it automates the process, it allows for exchange of data. Ultimately, what matters is that you should know your business process really well. And you should know all the ins and outs of the data. And you should have a very good idea of the formats in which the data comes to you and what you're communicating. And make sure that your tool is ready to parse the data and put the information, the data, into intelligible information. Because data is just zeros and ones. But what makes it intelligible is parsing it properly, knowing exactly what are the attributes that that set of binary is representing. And so RFID, M2M, all of these are means to the end. The end is having a proper information flow system set up. And tools are generally a 70-30 mix. So like they'll have 70% of it made. It's kind of like when you go to one of those ethnic restaurants, you know how they have 70% of the dish made, and then 30% they throw a little oil and some green chilies and ginger and saute it for you. That's the 30%. So a lot of these tools are kind of like the way ethnic food is is prepared. And you need to do that because you got to have that ability to customize, but you don't want it completely customized because that would defeat the economies of scale. So you want to have a balance. Now comes the point where I have to make a point about asset management. Asset management never read the Declaration of Independence. You know, the Declaration of Independence, our declaration, where it said all men are created equal. Well, they didn't read that. So all asset management tools are not equal. And I'll tell you what that means. And I can say this because I don't sell any asset management tools. Asset management is actually a collective noun, because assets are a collection of things, right? So a lot can go under the brand. Much like when we get Kraft macaroni and cheese, it has cheese and it has macaroni. But it's not the best cheese, and it's definitely not the best macaroni. And yet the box sells like hotcakes. I mean, because kids are not very discriminating. And so they see a fancy yellow box for under $1, they're like, Mom, I really want macaroni and cheese, and the moms will get it. But the same mom will go and buy the Gouda cheese for herself and her spouse. So, what am I saying here? I'm saying that there are many, many companies that are selling big, big solutions, and they throw in an asset management module. But that doesn't mean that that asset management module is going to meet your enterprise's needs. So what you have to be, if you're a decision maker in an organization, is don't, as Flavor Flav from Public Enemy would say, don't believe the hype. Now what do I mean by that? I mean that your business should drive your decision making, not branding of a vendor, which means that think of the relationships that you have with your business partners. Upstream, with the vendors who give you the raw materials by which you make your products. Downstream, with the customers and the channels through which you market your product. And make sure that those business needs are met by the tools that you have in your enterprise. And not necessarily just because it's a module in a larger offering. All modules are replaceable. That's why they're called modules. Have you ever thought about that? So there is no law given by some divine power that says that if you're going to buy a complete solution from a vendor for your entire enterprise, I'm not picking on any vendor, I'm just talking in generality now, that every module is going to be best of breed. Many, many companies are the results of acquisitions, and they try to put a common brand name across those acquisitions, but they're not all metabolized in the same manner. So what ends up happening is that the brand comes on the module, but it's not necessarily best of breed. And it takes a discriminating decision maker in an enterprise who knows their business process well to see if each module meets their needs or not. And the main reason why I'm saying this is it'll reduce the total cost of ownership of IT assets in your organization. I spent the better part of 8 years advising CIOs on exactly this concept of what I call IT convergence. You've got to make sure that your IT goals are aligned with your business goals. Asset management is a litmus test of how well an organization is organized. Because if they're not organized well, they will accept the hype. A vendor will come in, they'll tell them, oh, we got that covered, and they'll believe it. And their process will be disorganized enough not to know the difference. And it takes subject matter experts who have spent their lives on asset management to tell you that it is a more complex field. It needs to be appreciated, and if it's truly appreciated, it will allow the enterprise to enjoy the real economic benefits of being competitive in a global market. It will allow for mergers and acquisitions to occur very simply and with very little contention, because there will be a process by which you will integrate those assets into your organization. And it will also help you with state and federal regulations of compliance, whether it's environmental or others. So keep all of that in mind. So when we say asset management, remember I started this session today saying that it's a lot more than a spreadsheet. So what you're finding out is asset management is really underscoring the way of life for an enterprise, how well it does it. And the better it does it, the better the tool will be that they will use to manage it. There are people with incredible minds who remember everything, but they will retire one day. And that's the promise of IT, is that if it's implemented properly, it will remain agnostic to the careers of individuals. And that's the holy grail. We're all trying to aspire for it. And smart grid is not going to be anything different from the way other enterprises run business as usual. It's all about assets and deploying them on a field and dealing with them and their life cycles. So in our concluding portion, do you have a question?
Yeah. So in case of smart grid, how do we decide about a clear boundary line between a smart metering backend, MDMS system, and an asset management system? Like, how do we decide which data goes to the asset management system? Case in point, like if there's a low voltage event, should it be passed to asset management system that this meter consistently has lower voltage? Or maybe if a meter has been disconnected, does that asset management system need to know about that information or not?
I will let, the question that is being asked is about the line of delineation between the data repositories for smart meters, which are the meter data management system, and asset management. Like if there's a meter that is chronically showing low voltage or incorrect information, at what point is that information shared with an asset management tool to take corrective action? Since Chris is a smart grid architect and they're involved in a lot of engagements, I will invite him to give his version of how it's done, and I have a couple of thoughts to follow.
Okay. The first thing that you need to think about is that the smart grid consists of two parts. One is the actual electrical delivery system, and the second part is the control systems, the sensors, the measurements, the communication pieces that allow you to manage that grid in a way that makes it a smart grid. So you have typically three different kinds of information traversing over the grid at any given time, and these are real broad generalities. The first is going to be the information that says, okay, meter talking back to the MDMS saying, this meter shows that they consumed X amount of power over the last period of time, whatever that meter is set to either push out or be pulled in, depending on how that particular utility works. The second kind of information is going to be measurements from the meter, from sensors and transformers, from concentrators on poles, and so on, going back saying, am I working all right? Do I have some parameter that's out of spec? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is the voltage too high? Is the voltage too low? And then the third one is the control pulses that go the other direction that say, turn off, turn on, change this, upgrade the firmware, or whatever. The first one is going to go totally to the MDMS, pass through the various concentrator computing systems, and eventually it ends up in a billing system that says you used X amount of information in whatever the billing period is, typically a month, pay me this much money. Okay? The second one typically goes through a set of processes that ends up in the grid operations center that says everything is okay or certain devices have problems. All the devices in an area are down, they're not sending, outage, okay? And those are the things that you look at, apply some diagnostics to, Bob's analytics, but not quite the business analytics that he referenced, to say, oh, we have a bad transformer in a substation, we have a bad meter, we have a bad concentrator on a pole, everything's all right, it's just that that guy didn't know how to send properly. All of that goes back into the asset management system, where you get the date purchased, the date installed, the last date maintained, has it had problems before, has that brand of concentrator and that particular model consistently been having problems system-wide, is it a maintenance issue, is it a replace issue, and so on. And then the decision is made, send a truck out, do something, and then whatever the something is also gets rolled back into the asset management system so that it remains current. Adds to the history of that particular device, so that if you're looking at asset management from a life cycle perspective, purchase, install, operate and maintain, remove and dispose, life cycle, you know exactly what's been done in front of that, and therefore with a little predictive analytics you can begin to say, how much longer is this device actually going to be a useful component? Should we pull it out? Were we going to replace it in 6 months anyway? Let's just go ahead and do it, and so on.
If you look at the way smart grids are being deployed today, Chris talked about the process and how asset management is invoked, and then how asset management data is updated as the ticket is executed. There is a lot more integration that is possible, but it's not there yet today. For instance, the smart meter data that is kept in the meterology tables is kept in a very different format than the data models that are used in SCADA systems. So even though they may be geographically co-located, in other words, the concentrator and the distribution transformer, where the SCADA system is connecting, but because the data models are different, all that happens is that the pipe is used to carry the data back, but the intelligence of that smart meter table information is not being absorbed by the SCADA system locally. So what is happening is that this data is finding an information highway over some wide area network back to a head end and to a meter data management system where it's housed. It then has a set of interfaces with asset management, customer information system, outage management system, with the appropriate firewalls, because technically outage management system has a foot on the enterprise side as well as on the power system side. The MDM has a foot on the power system side and on the enterprise side. So there are some very sophisticated rules for firewalls that are needed in order to keep them. But in an ideal world where the security controls are in place, the holy grail is that concept of what's called a smart dispatch. And Chris mentioned some attributes of what that smart dispatch would be. But if these systems all become SIM compliant on the back end, and the data that is coming from the meters is properly advertised to the appropriate parties that need that information, you could have a situation where there's an anomaly reported by a meter. It would come to a meter data management system. The meter data management system would identify this as an anomaly, contact the outage management system. The outage management system via the SCADA system can take appropriate action if there is need for fire prevention or things like that. You could do a remote disconnect of the meter and stop electricity from flowing there, or do some other corrective action. You could then invoke the customer information system, identify all the particulars of the customer that this ticket is for, go to a ticketing system like a Remedy or some other kind of system, open a ticket, populate the information from the MDM, the asset management, the outage management, the CIS into that ticket, connect that to a fleet maintenance tool, piece of software again, that resides on the laptop of a field service technician on a truck, and they've got all the information they need. That's like the holy grail. I call it smart dispatch. Some people call it smart. People used to use smart dispatch in a different way. Before, it was used to have the right combination of electricity to meet a demand. That was what smart dispatch was. But in smart grid, the concept of smart dispatch is a fully integrated system where there's no human being really associated with the movement of data. Only when it comes to taking the corrective action in the field is where the human being is involved. So that's kind of like the holy grail. What I want to do is just finish some of these comments. I like some of Robert Cormia is in the faculty of Foothill College, and he mentioned about 75% recycling and 2 million jobs. Holy cow. Why don't we think, oh, that's an SAT word, biomimetically. Okay, it's not about ore and enthalpy, it's about designing things correctly. So we agree with that. I saved 1 hour of driving and probably over 10 pounds of carbon dioxide. Webinars rock. He lives in La Honda, and he drives a Prius, but I think it'll still reduce a lot of carbon. But that doesn't mean you don't show up to the seminars, Robert. You got to come. There's a social element that exceeds the carbon footprint. Okay. This was great. Thank you so much. Will this presentation be made available? Greg, by the way, is calling all the way from Houston, Texas. Centerpoint Energy. And then Robert says, asset management and connection is critical for the enterprise. This was a great summary of both the process and the opportunity. So thank you, Bob, for sharing that. What I want to do is wrap this up by 7:15, so we have 4 minutes. If you would like to have maybe a concluding comment on asset management, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, whatever you feel like, tell us what you did in your short 29 years on this planet, whatever you like.
Okay. Remember, I'm 29 years old, but I am one of those gifted individuals who can remember sitting down in front of an 029 card punch for hours at a time, punching cards, making one error, and having, because my typing skills are absolutely horrible, and then having to go back and punch the card again, and then carrying it over to the card reader and reading it in, and then waiting for the printout to see whether or not I actually had coded things properly. That was in Fortran, by the way. I didn't learn COBOL or one of the business languages until much after that. But I spent about 15 years working for a natural gas pipeline utility and that was in the operations department. And about the last 4 or 5 years of that was in their environmental affairs department, where I was involved both in the field gathering of data, both for wells and storage facilities, read tanks, and also the company, in a moment of great delusion, decided that they would get involved in a coal mine in northern New Mexico. And I spent a lot of time wandering around a certain section of the Navajo reservation, trying to figure out what the hell I was doing there. After that, I moved over into the IT department, and I've been working primarily with database management systems, analytics, and data warehousing. And then more recently, I've become involved with the smart grid efforts that IBM has had, and I've been serving as an architect for a lot of our business partners in that time.
Great. And next, we'll have Bob to come and share some concluding remarks, and then I'll say a few things, and we'll adjourn this meeting.
All right, well, I am an excellent typist. It's my keyboard that's all bad. I just want to say that.
Pardon me, yeah.
You know what? The thought I want to leave everybody with is, if you want to do something fun, go back into a large organization, if you belong to an organization, and go ask different people what asset management means. And you're going to get a lot of different answers. If you ask the IT, there's IT asset management system, and they will say exactly, this is what IT asset management does. It sits there, it goes on the network, we push software down, we pull it back, we keep track of it, we look at it. I mean, a whole bunch of different ones. And they have a very narrow focus. If you go out to the facilities or maintenance people and ask them to asset management, they're going to have a very narrow focus about what asset management. I got something, and I got work orders and repair stuff that I do. If you go to the financial people and ask about asset management, they are going to say something different. So asset management means a ton of different things to different people. So if you just go Google asset management for liquid asset management system, it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Erfan, was that asset management can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's not easy to get the right thing. So you've got to be careful about what it is. And we've been in situations, and I'm sure you have been. It's an asset management shootout, and you're like, what are they doing here? Because they don't do anything that we do. But the technologies are excellent, and it continues on. You have to be very focused on what it is that you want. Take advantage of the leading technologies. RFID, there's some really cool things going on with RFID and other automated data acquisition types of routines, whether it's IT assets, whether it's production equipment, and things like pumps and anything that has the ability to connect into the network. You can get a lot of data. It has made asset management a lot easier if you can get the data. And with the ability to capture data and put it into really powerful databases these days, you can get the information. The hard part is the functional aspect, and that's what I want to leave you with, is the functional aspect is what you really need to focus on. There's a lot of great applications out there to use. One, several, or none may be right for what you need, but it's really focused. It goes back to the old days when we were first in the software business. Find something that does what you need it to do first and worry about the technology second, because if it doesn't get the job done for you, it's worthless, and it winds up on the shelf with all the other disks with the network software that you're out there. So it's an exciting opportunity across the board, and I think it's one that's going to continue to grow in stature across enterprises. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you need. Feel free to hit me with an email or whatever, and I'd be happy to have more conversations with you. Thanks so much for having me today.
So in conclusion, and thank you especially to the several people who sat on the East Coast and have attended this webinar. I know it's pushing on 10:15 in the evening. But I think if there are some takeaways from our talk today, one is that asset management is multidisciplinary and will require people of different skill sets to come together and work as a team in order to make an enterprise maximize their benefit from asset management. We've also understood the value of asset management, that in the absence of an automated system that is connected to the various aspects of your business, you're going to lose out. You're going to be less competitive. You're going to be wasteful. And you're going to have higher employee turnover because they'll be frustrated with their jobs. So asset management people are really like healers coming into an enterprise. And much like healers do with human beings, if you follow some of the Eastern sciences of health, they get to know you as a person and how you're thinking, and they look at you in a systemic manner before they start advocating cures for you. Same thing here. That you should not push a product on an enterprise until you understand very well what their needs are. And I would like to say anecdotally that if you see the growth of sunflower systems over the last decade, it is the results of them not pushing their product on customers. They go in and they understand their pains, And then once they understand their pains, they try to fit something. And many times they have to work with their competitors in this space in order to integrate with existing tools. And through word of mouth, this business has grown to where there are a couple dozen federal agencies.
65 or something.
Okay, several dozen agencies that are using this, and universities and national labs, and they're peacefully coexisting with, as I said, other big giants in the IT world. So the message from this is that you have to focus on personal mastery. I mean, if you take a chapter from Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of a Learning Organization, what a nice example of a type of organization that would really use an asset management tool. Because not only are you looking and tracking physical assets, but you're also seeing how human beings will interact with those assets and establish well-defined interfaces so that the contention is kept to a minimum. When there is job turnover, it doesn't affect productivity, and that there are proper metrics for growing the organization. So if there's an educational element to be taken away from this seminar today, is that there's a lot to asset management. It's a topic that needs to be taken very seriously, whether you're deploying any type of grid, whether in electricity, fuels, or water, or if you're trying to do sustainability projects. It provides you a tangible way of measuring your progress and also improving your efficiency. So I thank you all for participating in our forum today, and I just want to give you a couple of notes for the future events. Our next event for a webinar is going to be on August 13th. It's a Monday, and it will be at 1 p.m. Pacific. And the webinar is actually being hosted in Southern California in Culver City by a company called NTS. And you can go to nts.com and check them out. And they are essentially a big lab facility that do a lot of compliance testing. And they are getting involved in smart grid in a big way. And they got so excited about our webinars, they said, would you mind coming and hosting it as a seminar in Southern California? And I said, why not? So I'm going to do that. And the topic is very interesting. We're going to talk about securing TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol. And people will say, why do we need that? We have TLS. And I'll say once again, we're going to be talking about securing the which means that the security authentication occurs before the handshake is completed. That's the key thing. All this TLS and all the other security controls that we know in IP networks occur after the handshake has been done. It's too late. So we're going to have John Thuart of Blackridge come and talk to us about how that could be done in a creative way. And then August 21st, which is our seminar date back again in Northern California, we'll have Dr. Ahmed Faruqi come and talk to us about dynamic pricing and demand response. And he's actually going to bring case studies of the effectiveness of some of these pilot projects for demand response to see how sensitive people are to price variations in electricity. How will they change their demand for electricity? And you saw a different type of presentation on the same subject by Ed Cazalet when he talked about transactive energy back in June. But now we're going to talk about the kind of programs that a lot of utilities are considering deploying in their service territories. So that'll be fascinating. And then August, so this is August. So then September, we're going to continue the topic of cybersecurity, and we're going to have a talk on securing business process in enterprises. Now, you have companies like Alert Enterprise that are doing that. This is a new startup company, and they're going to talk about some products that they have developed to address some of the issues that are still remaining as challenges in that area. And then later in September, I've invited FireEye, this company that has an appliance for securing enterprises and provide near zero, I always say near zero day protection, and they have successfully thwarted many of the attacks on some national labs and other enterprises. So as you can see, the next couple of months are going to be extremely thought-provoking and educational experiences for all of you. I really encourage you, whenever there is a session in person, please burn some of those carbon molecule, atoms, and come on over. I mean, I recognize that I'm not helping the Kyoto Protocol, but if you come, trust me, you'll save carbon in the long run. So the total cost of carbon is going to be less for you. So with that, thank you very much. And I will now end the recording. And you all have a wonderful day. This meeting is now adjourned.